Welcome to Budgets and the Law, a module of the Budgets and Finance course of the State Library of Iowa's endorsement program. This module is not meant to substitute as legal advice. This module simply is conveying information about various laws that pertain to the financial and budgetary processes of your library. My name is Mary Ann Morey, and I'm consultant for the Central District with the State Library of Iowa. This module will examine various state and local laws that pertain to the library's financial management. This module builds upon the information you learned in the module titled Free Libraries Aren't Free, in which we discussed the roles of the library team. If you haven't yet viewed that module, I encourage you to complete it before viewing this one. In this module, we'll spend time looking at the laws that pertain to the director's interaction with your budget, the library board's oversight of your budget, and the city's involvement with the library's budget. We'll also examine how these laws determine your library's policies and procedures concerning its finances. A note about that bottom objective. We'll take that bottom objective, the one about how these laws affect and apply to your policies and procedures, and plug it in along the way as we look at the various laws pertaining to the three aforementioned library team members, the director, the board, and the city. We'll begin with the director. Let's do a quick review of the roles of the director regarding the library's budget. Library directors have a long list of duties pertaining to their role within the budget team. It's the director who is working with the library's budget on a practically daily basis. And because of that, here are some basic duties of the director. Draft the annual budget for the library board then to approve. Make the purchases, manage the spending, and pace that spending throughout the year. Provide the city clerk's budget reports to the board at each month's board meeting. Understand the fact that the library or that the city must be accountable for use of public funds, which warrants the director being accountable as well. Library directors should have a good grasp on the library's budget since they will need to report financial information on the state-required annual survey. And realize that many directors are also responsible for writing grants on behalf of the library. As stated in a previous module, while the director doesn't need a degree in accounting, having a good grasp of basic math skills, as well as a basic understanding of budgeting and record keeping or bookkeeping does come in handy. So what kinds of laws might affect the director's interaction with the budget? While there really aren't any budgetary laws that specifically mention library director by name, the following laws definitely apply to budgetary situations in which library directors may find themselves. Some of these laws will be reviews for you, assuming you have completed the library laws course. But maybe you'll now see how these laws definitely apply to specific library situations. It's always good to take what we've learned and make practical application from it, to put it into practice and use the knowledge in a way that causes us to act appropriately. You may recall this slide from our Laws for Libraries module, part of the library law course. Article 3, Section 31 of the Constitution of Iowa says in part that, quote, no public money or property shall be appropriated for local or private purposes, end quote. This seems like a simple mandate to obey, but we have seen well-meaning library staff violate this section, thereby putting themselves and their library and city at risk. Our state law library says this, quote, state law and accounting standards place restrictions on what trustees and library directors can do with public funds, property, and resources they've been entrusted to spend or use for the community's benefit. Even the equipment in the library and the staff's time belong to taxpayers. And once library staff accepts something from the public, whether it's money or a donated book, it becomes city property, subject to myriad rules. It's important to understand this concept. Public officials have gone to prison for failing to carry out this duty. Some librarians innocently do illegal things, but ignorance is no excuse for breaking the law, end quote. Closely related to that section of the Constitution is this Iowa Code, Section 721.2, which is entitled Non-Felonious Misconduct in Office. Subsection 5 says that it is illegal for a public employee to permit any person to use public property for any private purpose and for personal gain. The Iowa Supreme Court, in its 1930 decision, Love versus the City of Des Moines, said that public money can be spent only for public purposes. The public purses must be apparent at first blush and documentable. The harder it is to document an expenditure's public purpose, the less likely there is a public purpose. If an expenditure does not have a public purpose, the public should not be paying for it. Let's look at what this all means in practice. Librarians cannot share book jobber discounts with their friends group or staff members, or split an Amazon Prime membership with patrons, or share the library's sales tax exemption. This means your staff cannot take advantage of the library's discounts to order books as gifts. It also means that your friends group cannot purchase books for the library by utilizing the library's discounts. Hear me again. Not even your friends group, who may be purchasing books for the library. They cannot purchase those books through the library's discounts. You will instead need to have the library order the books, and the friends group can then submit a check to the city for the amount of the order, and the city will pay the bill as usual by using the funds donated by the friends. Next, the library's financial privileges cannot be conveyed. If a patron donates money to the library, that donation cannot be handed over to the friends or the foundation, even if it's a massive bequest. Note that donations given directly to the friends or foundation group obviously stay with those groups. The library cannot donate library funds to a local scholarship fund or give money to a community foundation. Additionally, you cannot use library funds to purchase gifts for staff or trustees. Worn-out computers cannot be given to a favorite patron who refurbishes them, even if he then donates them to nonprofit organizations. There are very strict laws and rules governing the uses of public funding and property. Also, you can't allow special privileges, such as making photocopies without payment, to be extended to yourself, staff, trustees, or other persons closely affiliated with the library. This is certainly not an exhaustive list of prohibitions that pertain to the sections of the state constitution and the Iowa Code we just looked at, but it does give you some considerations of ways that seemingly innocent actions may in reality be a flagrant disregard for established law. And as the old saying goes, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Iowa Code Section 384.3 states that all money received for city governmental purposes from taxes and other sources must be credited to the general fund of the city, except those monies received for the purposes of trust and agency funds. This is interpreted basically as use it or lose it. According to our trustees handbook, funds remaining in the library account at the end of the year will revert to the city's general fund unless the city has given authority to the library board to carry over the funds in the library account, or unless the funds are designated to a specific account. These types of specific accounts are often commonly referred to as a trust account. And there are two types of specific accounts. Permanent accounts, meaning the library can only spend the interest on the funds, and special revenue funds, meaning the library is allowed to spend the entire amount in the account. Our trustees handbook explains more about these accounts as follows. If the library has plans for year-end funds, the board should request that the city council pass a resolution to authorize carryover of the fund balance or establish either of the above accounts. The resolution should indicate, among other things, the title of the accounts, the purpose of the accounts, and whether the interest on the fund is to be added to the accounts. The city council then passes a resolution establishing these accounts to accumulate funds for a planned purpose or project. Note that these accounts are no longer officially referred to as trust accounts, but that is still a commonly used general name for these specific accounts, which you may come across in your city. The basis for the name change is Government Accounting Standards Board, GASB, Statement Number 34 from June 1999 that took effect in either 2001 or 2, depending upon the city's level of revenue. We sometimes hear from library directors and boards who say they don't want to report donations to their city because they think the city will take the library's donations and use them for the city's own purposes, to fix potholes, for example. Our state law library warns you against this action by saying this: even if you're afraid the city council will keep some of the cash the library takes in, it is incumbent upon the director to accurately report all revenue and expenditures despite potential consequences. To do otherwise is a crime, and not just in the figurative sense. We're talking about a felony. Some librarians ask if it's illegal to hold on to a June check from the county, for instance, until July, because there isn't time to spend it before July 1st, which means the city will likely divert it to the general fund. The state auditor's staff says, don't do it. If the check from the county is expected in June, then it should have already been accounted for in the budget for the current fiscal year, which allows you to have spent it at any point in that fiscal year between last July 1st and this June 30th. If the library's director and trustees are uncomfortable receiving the county's check in June, then it's time to talk to the county about issuing the check at a different time. If the county can't issue the check a few weeks later, or maybe earlier, then it's time to talk to the city about possibly holding the money for the next fiscal year. Again, if the city says no, there's not much you can do except attempt to accurately account for it and spend it in the current fiscal year. A slightly similar situation is when directors realize they have some extra funds at the end of the fiscal year and determine to spend down those funds by prepaying for services or expenditures they'll incur in the new fiscal year. Again, I am quoting information from our state law library. The state auditor's office says a city cannot prepay for goods not received or services not yet rendered, so such claims should not be paid until the goods or services have been received. Payment in advance would not guarantee receipt of the goods or services, thereby putting public funds at risk. Article 7, Section 1 of the Constitution of Iowa says, "The credit of the state shall not in any manner be given or loaned to, or in aid of, any individual, association, or corporation." A formal Iowa Attorney General's opinion dated July 12, 1979, confirms the state auditor's interpretation and judgment and further extends the definition of state to include any governmental subdivision, such as a city. Remember that since the library is a city department, this law applies to you. Our law library goes on to say, it is inappropriate, unethical, and against generally accepted accounting standards to use current fiscal year funds to pay for services to be received in an upcoming fiscal year. Auditors will look for compliance with something called the matching principle, which states that expenses have to be matched with revenues as long as it is reasonable to do so. Expenses are recognized not when the work is performed or when a product is produced, but when the work or the product actually makes its contribution to revenue. Only if no connection with revenue could be established can you charge costs as expenses to the current fiscal year, for example, office salaries and other administrative expenses. This principle allows a more accurate evaluation of actual financial performance. Encumbrances, on the other hand, are purchase orders or contracts entered into before the end of the fiscal year for goods or services not yet received. For example, a book ordered for the library in June, but not delivered until after July 1st, would be an encumbered obligation. The funds set aside in the budget for the book would carry over to the next fiscal year because the obligation for the order was encumbered or made before the end of the fiscal year. We've often had libraries attempt to do this with Bridges, the statewide ebook consortium. Bills would go out just at the end of the fiscal year, and the bill was actually for services incurred in the upcoming fiscal year. Some libraries would try to sneak a payment in the current fiscal year if they had a bit of windfall rather than waiting until the July calendar and paying the invoice in the appropriate fiscal year. This is not an acceptable practice, so don't do it. Here's another law that directors should be aware of. Public employees must be wary of accepting gifts. Iowa Code Section 68B22 states, except as otherwise provided in this section, a public official, public employee, or candidate, or that person's immediate family member shall not directly or indirectly accept or receive any gift or series of gifts from a restricted donor. The code goes on to list certain exceptions. For instance, subsection H includes plaques or items of negligible resale value, which are given as recognition for the public services. And subsection J includes non-monetary items with a value of $3 or less that are received from any one donor during one calendar day. As a general rule of thumb, librarians are advised not to accept gifts valued at more than $3. If a patron brings you a huge platter of cookies during the holiday season, share it with all your staff rather than claiming it for yourself. If a vendor includes a tote bag valued at $9.99 as a thank you gift for your library order, put it into your library's summer prize package. Don't keep it for yourself. Let's look at how laws may affect the library board's role in budgetary consideration. Boards, as you should recall from other courses, have a great deal of authority over the library's budget. Although the city allocates money to the library, it's the board's authority to set up the annual budget with the line items and to approve monthly bills. Boards also need to understand that there are state laws, which we'll look at in a moment, regarding accountability of public funds. Library boards need to remember that cities must account for all public dollars. We'll look at that requirement when we focus on the city's legal requirements regarding your budget. If you watched the first module in this budget course, you should recall that the Iowa Trustees Handbook clearly says, quote, the state library recommends that the city do the financial accounting, write checks for the library's expenditures after authorization by the board, and submit monthly financial reports to the board, end quote. The Iowa League of Cities and the State Auditor's Office will advise you the same way. This means that no library trustee should be writing checks from a library account to pay the library's bills. You are putting your library board in a very liable situation if you are asking a trustee to be responsible for writing checks and managing payroll. Iowa Code Section 384.20 is widely interpreted to indicate that the city should perform all the financial tasks for each of its agencies. The library most definitely is a city agency and part of the city government as long as it receives an appropriation from the general fund. From a legal standpoint, it is best to let the city absorb the liability for financial transactions, especially payroll. If the trustees pay the bills and payroll, the individual trustees can be sued. If the city pays the bills and payroll, the city absorbs the legal responsibility. The Iowa League of Cities and most city attorneys insist that the city handle all financial transactions for its agencies, including the payroll, in order to reduce the city's legal liabilities. According to your library's ordinance, your board should have control of the expenditures of all funds allocated for library purposes by the council and of all other monies belonging to the library. If you will recall from other modules and courses, this authority is given to the library board not only by the local ordinance, but also by state code. Iowa Code Section 392.5 specifically authorizes public library boards in Iowa to accept and control the expenditure of all gifts, devices, and bequests to the library. Even though the city council cannot directly control how the library's trustees use the library's budgeted monies, the library board still has a fiduciary responsibility to use public funds wisely and in compliance with applicable laws, regulations, contracts, etc. All of this means that your library board should be reviewing and approving your library's bills for payment. Such approval should be done within the context of an open meeting. Once the board approves the bills, you should give the invoices to your city clerk or finance officer for payment. In the event of bad weather, library boards may meet remotely for this approval of the bills. However, keep in mind that per Chapter 21, which is the open meetings law, you must also have a physical location for the meeting. Review training about Chapter 21, Open Meetings Law, to be sure you understand this provision. Realize that approving bills by email is never a legally accepted way to approve the library's bills or to make any other decision pertaining to the library. Meeting in an online environment that the public can view, such as a Zoom room or Facebook Live setting, does meet the legal requirements of an open meeting, although, as mentioned, you still need a physical location in addition to the online or remote meeting option. To reiterate, email is never an option for fulfilling open meetings requirements, so the library board should never approve bill expenditures via email. Although trustees have authority over the library's budget and the city council can't control the use of those library funds, this does not mean that the library board can do just anything at once with those funds. State law and accounting standards do place some restrictions on what trustees can do with public funds they've been entrusted to spend for the community's benefit. Perhaps first and foremost, the board, the director, the library's employees, and its volunteers must vigilantly ensure that public funds and public property are not transferred to private interests. Our state constitution, state laws, court decisions, and Attorney General's opinions prohibit such transfers. Please contact our state law library if you have additional questions or concerns about this topic. Your library's ordinance likely includes a section such as you see on this sample library ordinance. In most all cases, Iowa public library boards are empowered to authorize use of the library by residents of another town that needs to contract for its library services. A question the state library often fields is, how do you determine a contracting amount? I once took a phone call from a library director who had questions about a current contract her library had with a neighboring town. She told me the amount the other town was paying her city for library services. I quickly looked online to see the town's population, did some basic math, and realized that this contracting town was paying a grand total of 17 cents per capita to the library for its annual use. 17 cents per capita. Is that a good price? Well, perhaps it's good for the contracting city, but it's certainly not good for the library. These are some simple step-by-step instructions I have previously shared with libraries about contracting. You'll first want to determine the amount that your own citizens are paying for library services and use your city's per capita amount as a starting point. Take that amount and apply it to the city that you're considering as a contracting town, and you'll need to know the population of that town. Next, consider the per capita amount that your rural residents are paying for library services. And because most contracting towns are smaller, they would be considered an A-size library by state library size codes. So review the A-size library's per capita information from the state library statistics page to get an idea what those size libraries are typically paying for library services. Then choose samples of libraries with similar populations and average the per capita amount. Again, you'll go to the state library statistics page for that information. From all of those numbers, you can then determine a fair and equitable amount for the contracting city. Using the aforementioned steps, here's a quick example and solution to our earlier scenario. Suppose your city's residents are paying $41.50 per capita. Your county is allocating $33 per capita. The average of all the A-size libraries in Iowa is $31 per capita. And an average of similar-sized A libraries based on population of the city you're considering a contract with is $12.75 per capita. Thus, somewhere between $12.75 and $41.50 per capita could be an acceptable and expected contracting amount. For a city with a population of 200 people charged at, say, $20 per capita, this would mean a contracting amount of $2,400 annually. Keep in mind, with this amount, the contracting city is still paying less than half what the example city is paying, but it is more equitable than 17 cents per capita. Contracting situations may be good opportunities for the library board and city to talk together. Will the city be pleased with the library if it offers its city library services for a ridiculously low amount to a neighboring community? Talk with your district consultant who can guide you through contracting considerations. Let's continue our module by looking at laws that pertain to your city's involvement in your library's budget. Remember that cities hold the purse strings to your library's budget. Cities determine the amount of city tax dollars they will allocate to the library. This slide reminds us of all the city does regarding budgets and financing of the library. The city determines the annual amount that your library will receive. The city should be overseeing the payment of the library's invoices and provide financial reports to the library on a regular basis, usually monthly. The city also must understand accountability of public funds. We noted earlier that the library board has the authority to approve the library's bills and expenditures. However, your city will likely go through the process of having the city approve those same bills. In reality, the city is actually only acknowledging payment of those bills. Our law library explains it like this. According to the Iowa League of Cities, this is how the matter is addressed in the city clerk's manual produced by the league. After the board approves library bills and the general operation of the library director should coordinate information with the city finance officer to ensure the bills are added to the list of claims provided to the city council and published. This ensures that the expenditures are published in accordance with requirements in the Iowa Code and that the general ledger is kept current. While this is not mandated, both the auditor of the state and the State Library of Iowa encourage this preferred method. As with any other department, the library cannot spend more than has been allocated unless the budget is formally amended. Accordingly, the library and the city must work together to determine whether a formal budget amendment is required to account for possible expenditure overages or unanticipated revenues. It is often beneficial for the city council to receive a monthly or quarterly financial report from the library board to help ensure the library's budget is fiscally sound, end quote. So that seems to be the real reason that the city council sort of affirms the library's expenditures, not necessarily to approve their payment, but to formally acknowledge that certain funds have been spent. If you find your library has unexpected funds or unexpected bills that were not part of your originally approved budget for that fiscal year, your city may need to file a budget amendment. Again, this is something your city has to do. What is an amended budget and what might that have to do with the library's budget? Iowa Code Section 384.18 is entitled Budget Amendment and says a city budget for the current fiscal year may be formally amended or changed in the same manner as the original budget by May 31st for any of these reasons: to allow the appropriation and expenditure of unanticipated unencumbered cash balances on hand, the unanticipated receipt of non-taxpayer funds, or transfers between programs within the general fund. The state auditor staff wants our agency to remind librarians that even if the library's ordinance says that all revenue received by the library is for the library to spend, it is still up to the city to decide what the library gets to keep above and beyond that which was budgeted as expected revenue. So when you get a big windfall or you collect more fines and fees than expected and accounted for in the budget, The director and or the trustees have to ask the city, very nicely, of course, if the library can keep those funds and either spend them in the current fiscal year or save them for the next. The city is well within its rights to say, no, you have to turn those over to the general fund. While this is rarely done with bequests or memorials, because the public relations would be disastrous for the city and, in the case of a bequest, would likely conflict with the will of the deceased, it is done fairly often with excess fines and fees. The state auditor's staff emphasizes that more often than not, it pays dividends, literally, for the library director and the library's trustees to always and forever make nice with the city's administrators, the mayor, and the city council. Librarians often ask about getting rid of old electronics, equipment, furniture, and other real property. Ideally, your city government has a policy, program, and procedure for recycling or disposing of its own electronic trash and property. Check with your city clerk or city manager. Alternatively, your city may have a surplus procedure by which city agencies must surplus all property no longer wanted or needed. Either one of these programs would relieve you of the burden and liability of deciding what to do with these items. Most city, county, and state governments have strict procedures in place for handling expired city property that include, among other things, removing said property from the government's inventory and insurance rolls and ensuring that something shed by one agency cannot be used by another agency, even if it requires repair or reconditioning. The issue of who is responsible to take care of the library building is a huge one. We consultants are asked this question or similar ones a lot. I'm going to refer to and quote from the State Law Library for answers. According to both the State Auditor's Division of Municipal Finances and the Iowa League of Cities, the relationship between library boards and city councils is complicated with regard to capital improvements, capital projects, and maintenance costs such as utilities. There isn't one correct way to handle such funding requests or demands depending upon the urgency of the requests. Each approach requires frequent, thorough, and if possible, respectful and cooperative communication between the library's trustees and the city council's members. Public library buildings belong to their cities. The city is legally responsible for ensuring the library's property and its contents, for maintaining the safety of the building and grounds, for providing workers' compensation insurance in case staff gets injured on the premises, for all major repairs, and for the replacement of faulty building equipment, such as furnaces. If the library's roof caves in on visiting patrons, the lawsuits get filed against the city, not against the library, and not against the trustees or staff. City councils have a vested interest in working with library boards to ensure the soundness of library buildings in order to minimize risks and responsibilities and liabilities. When the library board presents its annual budget request to the city, there are typically line item budgets that add up to a total budget request. If capital improvements such as tuck pointing, for example, capital projects such as a new roof, maintenance such as snow removal, lawn care, and janitorial services, and utilities such as heating, cooling, water, and trash are included as line items, the library board and the city council obviously have a mutual understanding that the library is budgeting for its own building needs. If the library's budget does not include these line items, the city is obviously not appropriating money for them directly to the library, and council members should not be surprised when a special request for the library's new roof comes up. At this point, if the council insists the cost of a new roof comes out of the library's appropriations for staff, materials, equipment, and supplies, council members are well aware that library services to their constituents will be compromised. So politics alone can typically keep the conversation flowing. Officials with both the Iowa League of Cities and the State Auditor's Office agree that good communication between library boards and city councils prevents conflicts over responsibilities for covering the costs of building and property maintenance and improvements. This state law, Iowa Code Section 256.69, applies to every incorporated city and every county. It's this section that requires these entities to provide financial support to the public library. You may recall having seen this slide in other endorsement classes. You may also recall that we said elsewhere that this amount is outdated and incapable of adequately funding any library. However, the spirit of the law is that your city is required to fund the public library. As stated at the beginning of this module, this class is not intended to be an exhaustive list of the laws that pertain to library budgets and fiduciary matters. It is also not intended to be considered as legal advice. Always contact an attorney for legal advice. This module is designed to help you realize common library budget situations that are affected by law. Contact your district consultant or the state library's law library if you have additional questions or concerns. This concludes our module about budgets and the law.